Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Korra comic review. This is going to be my spoiler review for Legend of Korra Turf Wars Part 1. So on Wednesday I put out my non-spoiler review for the book, and now I think it's about time to get into some of the spoilers. I'm not going to go into insane detail in that I think this video will be a lot shorter than my non-spoiler review. I'll keep a lot of the just discussing every single scene type situation for the podcast review, which will be on the weekend. But I'll just be a bit more open in how I discuss the book overall here. So you know my overall opinion on the book after the non-spoiler one hasn't changed a lot since then. I still feel it's kind of on the borderline between kind of average going into good, depending on kind of how you approach everything. I think Korrasami ends up overshadowing the plot a lot, and there are problems with the plot as it's presented, even though it is just a small amount of plot. And then I think there are also some problems with how they approach Korrasami, but overall the relationship was relatively well developed. And then I think the plots, at the very least, even though they're not given that much development, I think they're interesting enough that I want to see more of them going forward. So, getting into the spoilers, the details of things, I think in a way it represents part of why I feel that this book is kind of on the weaker end of the comics. There's not a whole lot to spoil with this book. Like, you could talk really, really openly about this book, and I think just not inherently ever ruin it for anyone, because so much of the book is just the exploration of a relationship. And because they've been so focused in the marketing and the lead up to this book on Korrasami, you can't exactly say that like it's a spoiler to kind of say, oh, they have this Korra and Asami scene. Because one of the main things they've spoiled is that there are 2 kiss scenes between Korra and Asami in the book. So that's not at all a spoiler. And then none of the scenes that they specifically have, I really consider a spoiler either. Because it is, you know, just a lot of Korra and Asami stuff, as I said before. It's just, none of it is like, oh, if I told you about this Korra and Asami scene, it would completely ruin the book for you. Outside of just the idea of like, oh, I want to view the book in full on my own for the first time, that's my first experience with it. Spoiling that, there's no actual just one thing you could say about this book that would spoil it for them. And I think it's always a little bit of a letdown when there isn't any like big reveal like that. And even in the plot side of the book, there isn't that reveal either, because the Turf Wars Part 2 cover spoils what is arguably the like biggest like potential moment in this book, that being Tokuga getting you know, spirit possessed, spirit morphed, whatever way you want to call it, by that dragon spirit. But even then, like, that is just like a kind of like last couple of pages reveal, and we don't get fully into what that means for him just yet. So that's just kind of like a somewhat interesting thing going forward. It still doesn't help his like character as such, in that it's going to be one of those situations where like, oh, is he suddenly now going to be just interesting because he's kind of half spirit now, when we never really knew him as a character before he was half spirit. I think it's interesting that it seems like to some extent they will explore like what it is to kind of be changed like that by a spirit. I hope in Part 2 and 3 they delve a little bit into like, does this in any way make him like part spirit, or like what impact does this have? I assume that it probably immediately means that he can't ever be a bender. Like, even if there was a line turtle that showed up, he couldn't be given bending in the same way that like Yao, I think, one's friend Yao, who was kind of possessed by a tree spirit at one point, in the same way that he very clearly didn't get firebending. Now, are they going to explain it that like that situation was because he was a tree spirit, it didn't make sense for him to be fire, complete opposites? But I don't think the idea of Tokuga becoming a bender is ever going to be a plot point, and just because line turtles I don't see randomly coming back like this. So the question then becomes, I suppose, does being part spirit now make him like physically stronger? Does he develop some level of like immunity or defense against bending because he is kind of part, you know, dragon-y type spirit? Because of his appearance, and I think one of his arms is kind of more or less like a kind of kind of claw tentacle like thing or something like that. It is still a lot of speculation about what it really means to be like this, and I suppose depending on how it's approached, they could go like one of two ways, where like it's just this kind of random thing and it is only a physical thing that sort of, alters, if it is one of his limbs, how he kind of has to operate. Or they could go a little bit deeper into like, why is it that one of the like key things that spirits can do to humans is kind of morph them into a kind of different version of themselves? Why does that actually happen? And why do spirits attack humans in that way and do that to them? I'd like to know the details of that too, because in the moment when it happens, the dragon spirit is chasing Tokuga and Korra is kind of trying to stop the spirits from attacking, and she kind of has to go help Asami, so the spirit ends up getting Tokuga and kind of saying, like, human, you will pay for your consequences, and he does this to him. So it's obviously what Ai did to the hunters and implied what was done to Yao. So it's something we've kind of seen before to a degree, but because he's going to be in part 2 and 3, it's going to be interesting how they approach it. So I like this, but I feel like part 1 maybe should have, to some degree, went into an exploration of what it kind of means. The other thing with that is like part of the only other, like, I suppose, potential spoiler would be what they do at the very end, is that they basically, in the last scene of the book, explain that the reason Tokuga attacked the portal at the end, which led to him being made into this kind of being spirit morphed, is because he was hired by Wonyoung Coom, who's the developer who owns the land around the spirit portal and is trying to turn it into an amusement park. The reveal at the end is that Wonyoung hired Tokuga and the Triple Threats to attack the portal to get rid of the airbenders who were guarding the portal from Wonyoung. And basically, because I suppose Wonyoung more or less put Tokuga in so much danger, and basically in doing this job, it's kind of changed him into this kind of half spirit, half human. He kind of takes his revenge on Wonyoung by basically taking over his like company that he owns, like Coom Enterprises now, and he's going to do something with this added power, being the leader of the Triple Threats and now having the power of a businessman. Part of the reason why it's a relatively weak ending cliffhanger is just because we don't really have a great idea about how powerful Wonyoung Coom is. And part of that is just down to the fact that we don't know either of these characters particularly well. We don't know Tokuga's personality, like, at all. Outside of the fact that, okay, he's clearly a kind of criminal type character, and he's a good fighter, we don't know anything about him, like, personally, and his approach, or kind of what he's about. Similarly with Wonyoung Coom, outside of him being the somewhat evil, despicable businessman, like, who is he? How much power do the Triple Threats have now that they kind of have control of this business? Is Coom on a like Future Industries level, a Cabbage Corp level, or is he does he happen to be a somewhat rich businessman? And then what does this actually mean going forward? He does say something along the lines of like to Coom that like the Avatar ordered the spirits to attack me, which is why I'm like this. So unless the implication is that he's going to like go public with what happened to him and kind of try and say that like, be careful around Korra, she'll have the spirits attack you and turn you into a monster. And maybe part of the angle they'll go with is that he really makes it public that if you mess with spirits, you can be like physically morphed into a monster, more or less. That will be a somewhat interesting approach to take in terms of adding this extra fear factor of humans and spirits. And what was, I suppose, more or less in the show implied to be, in general, them becoming somewhat better with each other, this could actually rip it apart. Because while I feel how it's explored in the comic is just given so little page time, I think it is, as I said, ultimately the biggest ongoing plot point within the series right now, human-spirit conflict, and Korra's quest to ultimately try and make that a good relationship between the two species. I think there are interesting aspects going forward, and I'm interested to see in part 2 and 3 how they approach it, because they do reference the book 4 refusal of the spirits to help, and they do reference the fact that, oh, now that there's this other portal, now you care. What about before? How is there any level of trust between the two of them? And how Korra approaches this, how everyone approaches this, is going to be very interesting going forward. It's just, I don't feel like we get enough at all in this book to really get any of that, because what they set up here is that the dragon spirit basically says, okay, Avatar, you make sure to protect this portal so that the humans don't mess with us. If not, we'll take things into our own hands. And then, when the big action scene at the end happens, like, there's no real implication that, like, the triple threats attacking the portal did anything to the spirits themselves. Outside of it, obviously, the portal being kind of surrounded by, like, you know, spirit wilds in a way, they didn't, like, hurt spirits or attack spirits as such. It was just that they were trying to force the airbenders away. Like, I would have understood it if, like, some of the triple threats were in the spirit world, literally, like, burning the spirit world down and, like, attacking spirits, but it all happened outside, so it feels just like the spirits are really the bad guys here. Which I think ultimately it has been the presentation that, like, the humans are trying much harder than the spirits within this relationship, and something's going to have to change. And I think if this book can get that right in part 2 and 3, what potentially starts, you know, the spirits to actually, you know, try with the humans and really open themselves up, that could be fascinating, because that's going to be one of the bigger things in the book. Because I think, you know, Korra, the airbenders, a lot of characters in terms of humans are actually, like, open to, like, better communication, better relationship between the two species, but basically none of the spirits are. So, you know, interesting, but ultimately goes nowhere really. Raiko's plot, basically outside of what I said in the non-spoiler review, there's nothing specific here. Like, he has this kind of Water Tribe advisor guy with him, who's basically like his kind of campaign runner manager guy, and basically all of his decisions kind of go through this guy in a way. So I'm half wondering, are they going to kind of explain it that the reason he's been so useless as a president recently is because of this guy, and they'll blame a lot of it on this kind of manager guy that he has, and he'll eventually at some point get rid of him and maybe show his better side as the president going forward. Because, as I said, it is very, very bluntly done how, like, clearly the comic makes it out that Raiko is awful in every way possible, that he's not managing the housing crisis. He only in any way acts about the housing crisis when his campaign manager basically says, this could get you some votes if you handle this effectively, despite everyone being like, have you seen all the people out there? They have no homes. Are you going to do anything, President? And he's like, no, the city has no money. I can't do anything. But then, almost immediately, Korra is like, I feel what we need to do is basically turn the land around the spirit portals into, like, some form of kind of like a heritage park type thing, so that it is kind of protected land to a degree, and what you need to do is basically buy that land for the city and make a protected land. That's kind of Korra's idea here, and Raiko's just like, no, don't care about spirit matters, gonna focus on the stuff that will get me back as president. So Raiko, once again, one of the big things with his character is him completely being ignorant and not knowing anything about spiritual matters, and ignoring the advice and help of people who do know stuff about it. Book 2 finale, anyone, you know, how different would things have been if Korra had the whole support of the city and the president going into that final fight? I think things would have went very, very differently. So there's that, the Raiko plot. The triads themselves, there's really nothing else to say. Like, the Creeping Crystals are given basically no development. They're just an enemy of the triple threats here, and that's it. They do, in terms of, I suppose, maybe some details, basically say that the reason Tokuga is the leader of the triple threats now is because he, you know, bumped off Viper. Now, I think there might be a continuity error in this book with Viper, in that they say that Tokuga bumped off Viper, kind of implying that he killed him. As Two-Toed Ping explains to like Lin and Mako that like anyone who didn't agree with him was basically killed. Like they have actual like implied like Tokuga killed all of these people. But then when a lot of the triple threats are arrested after a turf war, Viper is one of the characters arrested. It's clearly him, but it's also implied that he was kind of either like killed, defeated by Tokuga, and there's just a lot of implication. Like the only way it works is that he was defeated by Tokuga and now works for Tokuga, but they never explain that. So like Viper just appears twice, once implied being killed and then the next being actually captured by the police. And as well as that, like this is the scene where they also capture Two-Toed Ping, and then Two-Toed Ping is later talking about Viper as if Viper's dead. So it's really a really weird kind of continuity moment that they just don't really go into. But there's nothing else explained, like where Tokuga came from or anything like that. Just that, oh, the triple threats have a new leader. Not all the other triads know about him, and he's a bit of a mystery. But he's kind of bringing them back. So there's that. And the only other thing I think in terms of spoilers to talk about is the one thing I alluded to quite heavily in the non-spoiler review, but didn't say what it was. That being, during Kaya's basically history lesson on same-sex relationships and how the different nations views them in the Avatar world, we go through the details of just like, okay, the air nomads are very open about this. They just accept it. It's fine. They were extremely open with it and accepting, as basically she says that like when Kaya came out to Aang, he was 100% fine with it. No issues whatsoever. That's just an air nomad thing that they're always accepting of that sort of thing. They kind of explained that the water tribes are for the most part accepting of it. They're just quite private with their kind of personal lives, as just a general rule. Now, maybe that was the southern water tribe she was talking about more so than the north. But, yes, the northern tribe is traditional, but like maybe it's a bit far to kind of go and say that they'd just be utterly unaccepting of this. I like just the idea that they tend to keep their personal lives quite private, but there's no like suggestion that like it's just really like you can't say anything about this or that sort of thing. Just that it's be a little bit selective with who you tell. Don't just announce it to the world. That's their approach. The Earth Kingdom they basically say as a fairly like militaristic nation overall, the big nation. It doesn't have the best history with it. But they don't really imply that like the Earth Kingdom just is against it, just that it's kind of a very real world where like it is, kind of minority kind of type relationship, and not everyone is accepting of it. But for the most part, it seems like it's fine. The Fire Nation is where there's a little bit of a problem, in that basically what is said is that the Fire Nation, like historically, were fine with it, until Sozin basically outlawed it, basically made same-sex relationships criminal. And this is where I have the issue, in that this feels like a very heavy-handed, poorly written, like, sledgehammer level type thing of just, we'll add this on to the overall bad guy of the series and no one will have an issue with it, without actually thinking about the character that you're adding this onto. And the issue I have with this is ultimately that as much as Sozin is more or less one of the biggest villains in the series, in terms of the guy who ordered a genocide of the air nomads, started the 100-Year War, continued it, and so on, left Avatar Roku for dead. I think there is a bit of a difference between that and suddenly now saying he was homophobic. Given that we know this character and have had a full flashback with him and kind of know who he is, I don't think this ties in line with basically the history of how Sozin turned from being Roku's best friend to being the kind of tyrannical ruler that we kind of later know him as. It feels like it doesn't fit. That, okay, yes, this guy maybe doesn't have the best history of like these kind of humane kind of social kind of decisions as a ruler, but I feel it's a really big stretch to suddenly say that he was just completely against same-sex relationships. Like, I don't think there was any implication that he was like that. In that, I wouldn't even go as far as to say like he was like racist or anything like that, even though he performed a genocide against the nation, because fundamentally the reason he wiped out the air nomads was to kill the Avatar, which was obviously his big thing for his whole life. He ended up having to let Roku die, and in doing so basically left this kind of open kind of thing to defeat him of the Avatars out there in the next nation, so I'll keep wiping out the Avatar, and that will help me as I go through the nations. I never felt like he had a hatred of the air nomads, and that he wanted to like kill them all because he just hated them. He did that just to get rid of the next Avatar, and it obviously speaks to how cruel of a person he was. But there is a difference between that and just suddenly making him homophobic. I feel they could have introduced some level of like, okay, here is like a character or a group from the history of the world or a specific nation that is quite homophobic. I feel they could have done that in a somewhat acceptable way, but just adding it onto Sozin is just not at all the way to go about it. It is a little, it's almost a bit of a joke, the level of just like, oh, if there's anything wrong, we'll just add it onto like the Fire Nation from that time period, in this case Sozin. And then I think the other one is just that like there's a slight sense of like, okay, Kaya, I get it, you're giving a history lesson here, but you are somewhat connected to what you're talking about here, in that like your father's like people were wiped out by Sozin, and you're kind of just talking about him so casually, and then it's little things kind of like that with that scene that are just a little odd, that she's just talking like so casually about it, and there's all these connections to it. Like she talks. One of the other reveals is that they kind of say that Kyoshi was basically bisexual. They kind of implied that she had relationships with women and men. Which is kind of fine. It's just like another little fact about Kyoshi. Cool. And they just kind of imply that like, okay, even someone as like powerful as Kyoshi during her time period couldn't really change anything within the Earth Kingdom in terms of how they viewed these relationships. Which is, fine. But there's also a sense of like, you're talking about a reincarnation of your father, like a little bit of character here coming into play rather than the straight history lesson. But I get why they did it in the way they did it, and didn't really have kind of Kaya be like very like invested and like emotional about kind of what it is she's specifically talking about. But as I said, the main weakness will be the whole Sozin line that I really, really do not like. And like honestly, I'd probably go as far as to say like I hope that for like the library edition they like take that out or change it in some way, because it is just, I think, super heavy-handed how it was done. I'm never really one to call for kind of changes like that, where like you do have a certain print run of a book where like it's going to have one thing and then another print run of the book is going to have a different thing. But like this is, I think, a writing blunder that you probably should fix just to make things better, basically. But yeah, on the Korosami side of things, there's like nothing really to talk about with regards to spoilers. Like they were, as I said, they were so, I think, out there about like Korosami is what this book is about. They talked about it in so much detail that there's almost nothing new to really say about it, because it's all out there. Like the two kisses that we get, we knew about them already, and I don't think the context of them like is enough to really prompt a like really big discussion. The other characters' reactions to it, like everyone's basically okay with it. The only in any way discussion you could have about like, are they actually going to do something with Mako here in this? I personally hope they don't. I personally hope they just have Mako be, okay, he was a little bit like, this is a bit of a shock, but he gets over it. I hope in part 2 and 3 he's just fine with it. Maybe there is a scene of Korra and Asami, like just they get a chance, like 3-way conversation to just talk to Mako, and maybe there's a little bit of a conversation where they fully just like, they're all like, no, this is probably a bit weird, but we're all cool with this, yeah. Not having Mako react in front of like everyone. Maybe they'll do that coming forward, but like everyone else is fine, like Opal, Jinora, and so on. Does Tenzin find out in this book? I don't think he does. Not that I think there'll be any sort of a reaction to it. It's just that we don't actually see, a Tenzin reaction to it. Kaya obviously kind of figures it out on her own before they tell her. And yeah, like the rest of it's fine. Like Korra's parents obviously accept it pretty well. And that's that. There's basically no one they encounter and tell has any opposition to their relationship. They just kind of always say that, there'll be people out there who won't be accepting of it. So I'm kind of almost waiting for that to happen in one of the next coming parts, like 2 and 3, to just like introduce someone who is against it. I'm kind of thinking, but kind of in a way hoping they don't, that it might be Raiko. Like if once Raiko finds out that Korra and Asami are a couple, he might reveal that he's kind of like anti same-sex relationships as well. In that one of the things they're teasing about part 2 of Turf Wars is that one of the issues Korra will have to face is about being neutral as the Avatar, kind of implying that she can't show just such clear opposition on like kind of political views to some things. So even though she may want like, oh, Zhu Li, you're running for president, I'm going to support you fully and be anti-Raiko, when, maybe she has to be neutral. I don't know if they do that. That might seem a little too political, where they don't really need to do that. But yeah, I think that's most of kind of what I have to say about the book in terms of spoilers. Other Korrasami stuff. I suppose some of the stuff where they refer to the past. I wasn't a big fan of the scene where they refer to the race car scene. Just because I feel like they're giving that scene way too much importance. Like, I get it's meant to be the moment of just kind of Korra kind of in any way becomes friendly. Korra and Asami in any way become friendly. So it kind of is like a start point for their like friendship. But I think the scene that they have here gives it a little bit too much importance. And then again, the whole retcon issue comes up of just like, Korra wasn't really scared in that scene. She was kind of slightly taken aback by like that Asami could do something so intense, but Korra herself was not like terrified during that race car scene. And then they do touch a little bit on stuff like during the 3-year time gap, saying that like this is when the relationship properly like formed. I feel they almost should have had like an actual flashback scene to kind of explain that a little bit more, just to give it a little bit more depth there, because they bring up the whole letter thing, that like this is kind of part of the reason why Korra only sent a letter to Asami. But again, it's one of those situations where they say it without actually kind of really saying like why, and they just needed to go a little bit further. And I feel that scene is meant to be one of the most important scenes between the two of them in the book, kind of explaining why their relationship moved from friendship into romance. But it isn't as well done as you maybe think it is. And then, there's not a ton of other scenes where they have like the referring to the past and kind of changing things, but it is something that's, I think, worth mentioning to a degree. So that's my spoiler like review / discussion of the book. As I said, much more detail we'll go into. It'll be probably myself, Greg, Kelly, and Harrison is at least the plan right now for the podcast on Sunday, and we'll go through the book page by page, tons of discussion, and that'll be like everything covered about the book, a bunch of different opinions, not just my own, and we'll see where that goes. Podcast on Sunday. So yeah, that's been the video for today. Thanks for watching, and bye.